I have covered a decent amount of horror games on my channel now, and every time I wrap up a video, I immediately start seeking for a new one to dive into. Most of our horror games usually follow the same formula. It plays into that primal instinct of fight or flight. Most of the time, you have choices on how you approach certain scenarios. You have to deal with inventory management, but this is usually combined with safe rooms so you can stash key items and plan your next steps. And most of the time, they have compelling stories that's wrapped up with head-scratching puzzles. Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Signalis, Dead Space, and Cry of Fear. All these games are very different, yet they're similar in design. Yeah, anyway, this one is nothing like a typical horror game. Condemned is a game where you abuse your power of authority and beat up the local crackhead population. Man or woman, no exceptions.
Federal agent, come out peacefully or I will use force.
Heading into Condemned, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but what I did know is that this game was developed by Monolith, the people behind the Fear franchise. Yes, another reason for me to talk about Fear. Go watch my 2 videos covering it, but do that after this one, okay? What I find interesting about these 2 games is that they were being developed alongside each other and released 1 month apart. It has a heavy emphasis on melee combat, whereas Fear has an emphasis on gunplay. They both graphically look very similar and even share some assets and sound effects. The atmosphere is also very similar. It almost felt like at points I was playing Fear again. Condemned shares a lot of Fear's DNA, but instead of fighting an army of super soldiers, you're fighting an army of super crackheads. so there's that, I guess. We play as Ethan Thomas, an FBI agent who's currently on his way to a crime scene, and oh lord, not even a minute into the game and we already have a jump scare. We're then escorted to the crime scene, and this is where we're introduced to our fancy tools that will help us find clues and evidence. These tools are broken down into 2 categories. Our left hand holds our detection tools, which consist of a UV light to detect organic substances and a laser light to detect inorganic substances, as well as a spectrometer, which is used to detect airborne elements. And our right hand holds our collection tools, which consist of a 3D scanner, sampler, and a camera. Now these tools sound cool and all, but it's mainly a gimmick that's mandatory to progress in certain parts of the game. Don't expect to have an option to skip any of these investigations. So on repeat playthroughs, you will have to follow the same bloody pathways and scan certain clues in order to progress. At one point, I forgot to save and I had to repeat the same investigation 3 times. Oh, fuck's sake. Oh, I didn't save your kid! Because some events aren't triggered once evidence has been collected. That being said, collecting evidence and forwarding it to forensics is really interesting, as we find out more about the person we are chasing, and there are some twists and turns along the way. So finding crime scenes is always interesting. It's also a good opportunity to take a breather as you won't be interrupted during your investigation. We finally make it to the crime scene and we start scanning for evidence. Ethan then has a very disorientating vision. Ethan is a gifted investigator who has the power of precognition. The visions are usually vague, but they guide him on the right path. As we collect the evidence, I just love the soundtrack that's playing in the background. It's eerie yet intriguing.
Processing image. That's it. The same mark.
The crime scene is grisly and it's been purposely set up for display, as if the killer is proud of his work. Rosa, our forensic analyst, contacts us and talks to us about the evidence we collected. It's possibly linked to a killer they've been tracking for a while now. They've dubbed this killer the Matchmaker. He targets young women and then poses their bodies with male mannequins. The crime scene is set up to look like a date, hence the name the Matchmaker. During the investigation, the detective smells something sus and goes to investigate.
Becker, no smoking at a crime scene. I don't smoke. Well, someone was.
Only to discover that there's someone above them having a ciggy.
He's right above us!
This is where we split up and Ethan has to try and restore power to the building, but there is trouble in our way.
Federal agent, come out peacefully or I will use force.
Now this introduction to combat is amazing. Why? Because the gun completely leads you into a false sense of security. The game doesn't outright tell you that guns have incredibly limited ammo. Whatever's in the gun at the time is all you have. We start off with only 9 rounds. Now you could put someone down with a single headshot, however this only applies to the smaller enemies in the game. You will eventually encounter much stronger thugs as you progress. some even carrying their own guns. You cannot carry ammo at all. Firearms are scarce and usually hidden throughout the levels in the game. You cannot carry any extra ammo at all. You will eventually run to people with guns, and if you're quick enough, you can kill them before they fire a single shot to save ammo. But this doesn't guarantee it will be fully loaded. Most of the guns you will find will either be full or half spent, which leaves you in a dilemma on whether or not it's worth taking it over an axe or a pipe. There is no inventory in this game. Ethan can only carry one weapon at a time. But for a game that mainly focuses on melee combat, Monolith still gives us a variety of guns to find. You have your standard Colt 45 pistol, which is probably the most common weapon you will find. There's also a revolver that does a ton of damage, but this gun is pretty rare. I only found 3 in my playthrough. A pump action shotgun, which I personally think is the best gun in the game because it holds up to 5 rounds and can drop most of the enemies in the game in a single shot. There's also a sawed-off shotgun, which is not very good honestly. A submachine gun, which is also not very good. And finally, an M14. This thing packs a punch at all ranges, but just like the revolver, it's rare and can only be found in the later parts of the game. Guns are devastating and Condemned. I will always pick one up even if it only has 2 rounds in it because it's better to use that ammo before someone else does. Leaving guns around will be used against you, and believe me, the amount of damage these guns do, it goes both ways. You can be killed with just a few shots or even just by one. You will quickly learn just how brutal this game can be. Eventually, we find the power switch, but it's faulty, which causes it to shock Ethan and makes him collapse. Then a mysterious man appears out of nowhere and steals Ethan's gun, but also decides to spare him. With nothing left to defend ourselves with, we will have to settle with whatever we can find in the environment. Now there is a large variety of melee weapons to choose from. Each chapter even has their own unique weapons which can only be found in those locations. This keeps the game fresh as you won't be fighting with the same weapon over and over again, and you will have to adapt with different weapons. There are 4 statistics to take into consideration for each weapon, those stats being damage, speed, block and reach. 2-handed weapons such as the sledgehammer and fire axe deal massive damage with the trade-off of them being very slow. 1-handed weapons are the opposite. They're much faster to use, but they're overall weaker. Now I will be honest, when I first started playing this game, I thought the combat was complete bullshit. Enemies sometimes hit you when you're nowhere near them, and sometimes blocking just doesn't work. And damage is incredibly inconsistent. For the first couple of chapters, I struggled with the combat because I couldn't wrap my head around it, but I was playing on hard mode. But after a while, I just stopped and looked back at the stats of the weapons I was using, because I wasn't really considering them at the time. Once I understood the kind of weapon I was using, I then took my time with each fight instead of just spamming mouse 1. And eventually, this is when the combat clicked. Condemned takes patience. If you spring into fights without being aware what you're up against, you will be punished. Some enemies look the same, but this doesn't mean they fight the same. The AI in this game fight like animals, and they're incredibly unpredictable. Just because you get the first hit in, this doesn't mean you have the upper hand. Sometimes a good hit can cause them to turn their back against you, which can bait you towards them, just for them to quickly spin around and quickly catch you. Depending on what weapon they have, they can kill you with a single hit. Playing this game on hard mode was a stressful yet rewarding experience, as winning a fight without losing a single point of health felt rewarding. You really have to earn it. Each fight can be a serious obstacle for you. Taking any bit of damage is devastating since you cannot carry any meds in the game. Throughout the levels, there are stashes in the game that will contain meds. However, like I said, you can't pick them up. They can only be used if you're hurt. So if you take any damage later, it's important that you take a mental note where these meds were, because you will have to backtrack for them. This is what makes Condemned incredibly intense. If you're severely hurt, you have to fight your way through it until you find meds, and this just fills you with dread. In most survival games, you have choices in how you approach certain scenarios to minimize as much damage as possible. However, in Condemned, it's all on you. Your skill with melee weapons will determine how much damage you will take. You can win fights without taking damage, but in order to do that, you will need to master the block mechanic. Right clicking raises the weapon to block any incoming damage. However, it's not as simple as pressing one button. You have to time your blocks with their attacks, and since their attacks are completely random, you will have to learn how to block each one. As I said before, the AI fight like animals. Their attacks are completely random and sometimes hard to predict. If you successfully block an attack, this will cause them to ricochet off you. So the block is really more of a parry than anything. Once you block an attack, this gives you an opening to strike them. However, don't get too confident and spam mouse 1, because they will sometimes immediately hit you back after you hit them. This means you will still need to be cautious after you hurt them, because it feels like some of these guys don't feel pain. But the AI can also trick you into throwing up a block. I'm convinced the AI adapt to how you play, just like the replicas in Fear, because once I got decent with the block mechanic, the AI started to throw up a lot more feints, which tricked me into raising my weapon, which left me open to be attacked. The AI in this game are very clever. Some of them will viciously attack you, but others may go for ambush tactics. Some AI will wait for you to come to them. They'll wait for you to come around the corner and then strike. This can be absolutely devastating because sometimes they can just kill you with a single hit. But sometimes this doesn't work out for them because, well, they have huge models and they just poke around corners and it just makes them look absolutely goofy. But what do you do if you encounter more than just one thug? Well, the fight is going to be a lot more tricky because these guys do not care what's in front of them and they're going to swing for you regardless, even if that means hitting each other. But you can use this to your advantage. One good strat I came up with was to funnel the enemies through tight corridors and make them hit each other. And if they do, they start fighting each other instead of you. And whoever's left, just finish them off. I absolutely love this aspect about Condemned. These thugs are so messed up that they will just fight anyone, no matter what. Little is known as to why everyone you encounter seems to be so violent, but we do get a little bit of information before our first encounter. The police are assuming that these people are taking some new drug that induces rage. Rosa says that these sort of cases have been on the rise and crime has been going through the roof. This explains their animal-like behaviour and high tolerance to pain. Now I've covered the combat, let me go over some of the melee weapons in the game. You would think weapons such as the fire axe, sledgehammer and maybe the shovel would be good, right? Well, you're wrong, and let me explain. These weapons, in my opinion, are not worth using on hard mode, simply because of how slow they are. They do good damage, but the attack is really slow, and in a game like Condemned, you can't afford to be slow. If someone throws a feint attack and you go to block, you're screwed, because the time it takes to raise the sledgehammer or fire axe, and then the time it takes to lower it, is much greater than something like a pipe or a piece of rebar. If you do use a fire axe or a sledgehammer, and you take on multiple enemies, it's important you play more defensive, and use the reach to your advantage. But sometimes they don't want to fight on your terms, and they will go and hide instead. This is something I loved about this game. In Fear, you pretty much dictate the pace of every fight, but in Condemned, you have no control over fights. You are sometimes forced to fight on their terms. So for me, the weapons I mostly stuck with was one-handed weapons. They're weaker, but I'd rather have the ability to quickly block and deal with counterattacks. In some situations, you can't afford to lose health because there may be several thugs in your way of medkits. So now that I've gone over the premise of Condemned and how brutal this game can seriously be, I need to address the elephant in the room. You have probably noticed in some of the clips that I was using something quite shocking. This one weapon completely destroys everything Condemned is meant to be, a hardcore melee focused survival horror, but Monolith for some ridiculous reason decided to add a weapon that completely subdues any opponent. You are equipped with this weapon right from the very beginning, and if you frequently abuse it, the game becomes a breeze. But that isn't all. If you thought the fact it completely subdues a thug was bad, well get this. It has infinite ammo, and wait, it gets worse, it only has a 10-second cooldown. You probably think in a close quarter game, such as Condemned, 10 seconds would be a long time, but the thing is, Condemned is a very slow paced game. The thugs are placed in a way where you wouldn't be constantly fighting, and when you do get into a fight, it's usually against 1 or 3 thugs at a time, sometimes a bit more. The point is, since the game can be slow, 10 seconds is nothing. You can just wait around or block attacks until the cooldown is over. But much later in the game, Monolith doubles down on this mechanic and gives you an upgraded version that completely takes down a thug. You can just hear by the audio how much stronger this version is. I always wondered why Monolith would add such a thing and not balance it. It's almost like they added it so it would give game journalists an easier time. Okay, now that I've fully gone over the gameplay of Condemned, let's get back to Ethan. After losing our gun, we are left completely defenseless. Ethan would now have to resort to anything he finds to be used as a weapon. After fighting some crackheads, we finally make it back to one of the detectives.
I seem to be trapped over here, and I believe the suspect has my gun.
Oh, you believe? You literally watched a man pick the gun up and point it at you. Jokes aside, it's important to note Ethan calls the man the suspect. So this tells us that whoever this man was may be the Matchmaker. The detective then passes us a dogshit weapon, then gives us a tutorial on the broken taser.
Use your taser.
The fire axe is not only a weapon, but also an entry tool. It has a secondary use which allows us to chop down certain doors. The fire axe is needed in order to progress in some parts of the game, so it's not completely shit, I guess. We finally make it round to the other building, and then we're ambushed by the suspect.
How does it feel to be on this end of the gun? But listen, you bastard. Don't mess this up for us. We are both on the same path of righteousness.
Then the detectives break in to save us.
Strange turns.
Freeze! Police! Drop the weapon now!
What the fuck is that reaction time? After the suspect is finished yapping, he proceeds to throw us out the window. Now, Ethan obviously survives this because otherwise there wouldn't be a game after this. But now it's time we play a little game. After Ethan witnesses two fellow officers get gunned down by the suspect, with his own gun and then thrown out the window, what does Ethan do next? A. Call for backup and an ambulance. B. Go home. C. Go home then go to sleep. If you picked A or B, well, you're a moron. Obviously the answer was C. Ethan goes home and then goes to sleep in his uniform. He doesn't even radio in and inform them of the current situation or even go to hospital. His gun was stolen and then used for a double homicide. But nah, Ethan wanted to go for a nap. But this is where I'm starting to think Ethan is Superman or something. Because after being thrown out of a 3-story window, he appears to be okay. Now the story in Condemned is a bit weird sometimes. There's a lot of plot convenience and sometimes it doesn't make sense. A spooky jump scare happens and then Ethan wakes up for real this time. Only to discover some old creep was watching him sleep.
Who are you? What is going on?
Calm yourself.
The man is named Malcolm Van Horn, who was an old friend of Ethan's father. Malcolm informs Ethan on the current situation he's in. He is being blamed for the murders of the police officers, since his gun was used to commit the crime. A situation which could have been avoided if Ethan fucking radioed in. Ethan has to quickly decide what his next move is going to be. But during this, he catches a glimpse of a man watching from the opposite building. Malcolm essentially makes a choice for Ethan and reassures him he is trying to help, and he tells Ethan to run. But in order for us to escape, we need to break this digital lock. There's no fancy minigame or puzzle involved. In fact, there's 0 puzzles to be solved in Condemned. It's all straight violence. This is where we find the shovel, which is required to break digital locks. Just like the fire axe, this is the shovel's secondary use. This leads us down into the maintenance tunnels, and this is where we conveniently find a clue. Ethan has a sudden vision of a man with a camera taking pictures from a window. We 3D scan the picture and forward it to Rosa. For some reason, she stayed in contact with Ethan because she believes he's innocent and will help Ethan with any evidence he comes across to prove he's not guilty. Rosa receives the image and tells us the pictures are of Ethan inside his apartment. There are also traces of photo development fluid left on it. There are no local records of this fluid, which tells us someone developed these photos independently. And since there's traces of it on the floor, it tells us that these were developed by someone inside the train station. So this is where we head next. Not until a thug ambushes us and conveniently has a crowbar, which is what we need to open this control box. The crowbar has many secondary uses. It can be used to open gates, control panels and weapon safes. Yes, Ethan is somehow strong enough to pry open weapon safes. Superman, I tell ya. Here we make a disturbing discovery. Cheese puffs. Norton mates must have been around here. As we make our way through this office, not much happens and it's eerily quiet. The atmosphere in Condemned is superb. When there's no action going on, the atmosphere alone can keep you tense. This soundtrack reminds me a lot of the atmosphere in Fear. This soundscape makes you feel lonely and isolated. And in Ethan's case, he's been thrown to the wolves. Or should I say, your average resident in Blackpool. Ethan has to essentially become an animal himself if he wants any chance of survival. We eventually come across this door with a padlock, but this is where the sledgehammer becomes useful. It can be used to break locks on doors and medicine cabinets. It's still a trash weapon, but it can be useful. One thing I realise is that even in the current situation he's in, still moves like an 80-year-old with bad knees. He's incredibly slow when walking, but you can run, but for only like 8 seconds. It's actually quite pathetic for an FBI agent. This guy takes centuries to scale stairs. Like, mate, fucking move, you don't have all the time in the world. You're wanted for a suspected double homicide.
This is Thomas.
Why I'm angry? Don't ask me why. I've just woke up in a fucking steaming mood, yeah? Because I live in a shithole. Do you know what I mean? Birmingham is a fucking shithole. I hate the fucking place. I fucking hate it. It's full of dickheads. I fucking hate it.
After fighting our way through this office complex, we eventually receive a phone call.
Thomas speaking.
Ethan, it's Van Horn.
How do you know this number anyway?
I know many things about you, Ethan.
Oh, how fucking convenient. Valhorn is a man who says so much, yet so little. He goes on about Ethan's instinct, but is very vague about it. We finally make it to the train station, and we find more photo development fluid. We follow the trail, and it leads to something that doesn't seem human.
Oh, hell no!
The trail eventually takes us up into the abandoned part of the station, which is filled with violent thugs that were squatting up here. They're either pissed that we've entered their territory, or they're just drugged out their minds. This area is actually quite spooky, and it has this jump scare that really got me good. We see a man through the window walking down some stairs. If we quickly look over this balcony, we may see him. As you can see, this jump scare actually caught me off guard. You can see my crosshair freak out as it happens because it shook me good. But if you look carefully, I still landed a headshot. All those hours on CSGO finally paid off. As we go deeper into this office complex, Ethan has a sudden vision of a man moving a cabinet to block a doorway. With Ethan's Superman strength, he moves it with ease. Inside, we discover someone's hideout. It's filled with camera equipment and a radio, but most importantly, it has an incredible view of Ethan's apartment. Now, I have a question. How the fuck did Ethan not realise he's being spied on? The man is like 4 meters from his window taking pictures, and based on the photos, he was getting clear shots of Ethan gormlessly standing in his apartment. Ethan is a decorated detective, yet he didn't click onto the fact that he was being watched. Listening to the radio, we clearly hear recordings of what appears to be 2 detectives talking about a case. This man intercepted police radios and is listening on confidential discussions. Whoever this person is, we can safely presume this room belongs to the Matchmaker. Scanning the handprint though, we discover that this print is a match with the prints on the photos of Ethan. However, there is no records of these prints on the FBI system. He's completely clean and unknown to the police. Which raises a question. If these prints don't match with the Matchmakers, then who could this possibly be? In a separate room, we find 18 news clippings stuck to the wall. All of them are linked to 18 different serial killers. All the faces have been crossed out, and Rosa points out that several of these news clippings are about some of the cases Ethan's worked on. Before we could process any of this information, Ethan appears to start hallucinating and sees a black figure attack him. This is meant to be a boss fight, but it was an unfair match since I immediately start blasting him with a shotgun. The supposed hallucination ends and we see the suspect make a run for it. We chase him and it leads us down further into the train station. Whoever this suspect is, he clearly knows Ethan's weakness: stairs. We finally make it to the bottom and we're greeted by the friendly locals. Now there's a part here that just really annoyed me. Despite Ethan being on the run to try and prove his innocence, he refuses to skip the ticket barriers. Even though he's killed many people to get here, he still abides to the law and won't skip the ticket barriers. He will vandalise to get around them instead. Now I don't know if this is just lazy time planning for Monolith, but come on, I should be able to climb over that. Anyway, we break through this door instead and find an almost fully loaded shotgun. This should come in handy. Okay, now is a good time to bring this up. As devastating as guns can be in this game, sometimes they just don't fucking work. They either do no damage or completely miss. This rarely happens, but in a game like this, you can't afford to lose bullets. We continue to follow the suspect, but we're then suddenly ambushed.
Alive? You're still alive?
Yeah, I had the same reaction. We get a warm welcome and I open fire. There's something here that confused me. We walked right into an organised ambush that had multiple thugs involved. But in the background of all of this, there's just a woman smacking someone up. She appears to be quite tough because she's killed 2 people by herself. We finally catch up with the suspect, but he catched a train ride. But Ethan's a super cop, so he just climbs into the back. Yeah, there's no audio here. The PC port of Condemned is not very good. It sometimes has bizarre FPS drops and makes me feel like I'm playing on a toaster, and there are segments where audio is completely absent. There are patches to fix this, but I was lazy. The suspect smashes the window and pushes Ethan off, which is something that would kill anyone, right? Nah, Ethan is all good. We have to go through the maintenance tunnels again, and this is where we start seeing things that just don't look normal. The people down here look like walking corpses, yet they're incredibly nimble with their movements. They look starved and, well, dead. Their skin is blue and their clothes look like they've been drenched in water. It looks like their bodies were just pulled out of a lake or something. This never gets explained, and that's a good thing. It plays with your mind on whether or not what you're seeing is even real. This game loves to play with the fear of the unknown. We find the extinguisher the suspect used to push us off the train, and we collect DNA from it. While Rosa is analysing the sample, we watch the suspect flee once again. And this is where we encounter our first real big boy. The reason I love this little battle is because it shows to us how tough this guy is before we have to fight him. It builds up tension because you have no idea if your pipe is going to be enough to beat him, but this is where I fully got convinced that Ethan is indeed Superman. Despite this guy looking like he weighs 260 pounds and is wielding a sledgehammer, you can still parry him with a tiny lead pipe. And this is where I realised that one-handed weapons are the best. Because if I can parry people this big and not get hit back because I'm too quick for them, then damage output isn't important, since you can just basically parry any attack with ease. We break through the gate the suspect fled through and discover he switched outfit. Not only this, but a map of the train station with the blue rail line marked. The suspect that is fleeing has set up an extensive escape plan with multiple outfits for disguise and is using the tunnels to hide his movement. But the thing I don't get is the fact he left clues for us to find in the alleyway behind Ethan's apartment. Was this a mistake on his end, or is he playing with us? Or was it for plot convenience? Yeah, it's probably that. We break through the air vent and pursue him, but you can see his shadow on the wall, so I don't know if he was waiting for us or he bugged out, I really don't know. Rosa confirms to us that the person we're chasing is the one who killed the 2 police officers. Like that wasn't obvious already.
The guy you're following is the guy who killed the 2 policemen.
The Matchmaker. At least, I think so. Something's still not adding up.
Did he just hang up on her? The underbelly of the train station is filled with these walking corpses. They're quick, but their bodies are so fragile that it only takes one hit to put them down. We climb this ladder, which leads us into a boss fight. At least I think it was meant to be. This room has 2 roid heads in it with sledgehammers, so I presumed this was meant to be like a little arena or something. But you can just climb this ladder and they can't reach you. You can also skip this entirely and just drop down this hole. Another good scare from Monolith. Well done. It's again set up nicely because the first cabinet you drop down to has meds in it, which makes you assume you're safe, only to then be ambushed from the next cabinet, which is cruel because that med kit could have been instantly made redundant if you're not quick enough to fight back in time. The suspect leads us down into the abandoned parts of the rail lines. We then walk into this room and witness the battle of the crackheads. Ethan suddenly has another vision. The vision involves a man breaking a mannequin head with a crowbar. The blueprints outside the room have a red circle marking a particular spot on the train. We break into it to investigate and discover a hidden compartment filled with mannequin parts. Investigating further, we discover a label on one of the arms. It tells us the exact store it came from. The suspect left this clue behind for us to find. He's playing with us. He wants us to chase him. This department store is where we will head next. On our way there though, Ethan has another hallucination, which makes you really consider if Ethan is losing his marbles.
Maybe I have gone crazy.
We finally arrive at the abandoned department store. And not a lot actually happens here, but it's actually my favourite segment in this entire game, simply because of the horror. What Monolith did here is actually pure genius, and I will get to that in a second. We find a handprint, and whoever it belongs to is missing his right index finger, which matches the one at the crime scene. This is the Matchmaker's hand. Ethan then has a vision of a man being brutally struck over the head. We then find a trail which we will need to follow in order to find his body for more evidence. That is the objective of this level. But now let me talk about why I love this segment. The beginning is very quiet. The silence combined with all the mannequins is quite anxiety inducing. However, we know we're not alone because we get messages telling us to leave and we catch glimpses of people. We then witness a man being brutally murdered after pleading for his life. Whoever these people are, we clearly do not belong here, and this is their territory. And this area alone is what makes this whole segment terrifying. Now, why is this more scary than your typical jump scare? Well, it's the paranoia it creates. We have walked past countless mannequins, and then when we get here, one of them suddenly walks away. It's someone pretending to be one, and it makes you incredibly paranoid because you have potentially already walked past someone pretending to be one. And this only increases that possibility because the one we're standing right next to is actually human. He doesn't do anything to us, just stares. These thugs are nothing like we've encountered before. They calmly walk away and towards you. They don't act like animals like the previous encounters. It's almost like it's actually a mannequin pretending to be human. This plays into that fear of the unknown even more because you don't know if this is actually real. But hitting them in the face causes pieces to fly off, and if we take a closer look, these people are actually wearing pieces of the mannequin like skin. And underneath all that plastic, they look incredibly decayed. Walking around with all this paranoia, Monolith plays even more mind games with us. Now that we're cautious of every mannequin we walk past, Monolith does this.
They're dead.
This segment alone is the real reason I wanted to make this video. It's pure genius, and honestly, it may even be the greatest horror section I've played in a game ever. We continue to follow the trail, and Ethan begins to hallucinate once again, which only makes us question Ethan's sanity even more. We reach the end of the trail, and Ethan has another vision. Following it, we make an interesting discovery. It's another one of the Matchmaker's scenes, but it's the opposite of his MO. With further investigation, we make a revelation. This is the Matchmaker, the real Matchmaker. He's been dead this whole time, so whoever we're chasing is someone completely different. But what was he doing at the Matchmaker's crime scene? The investigation comes to a sudden halt when a police officer announces himself and gives us direct orders. Then a crackhead saves the day. Rosa then contacts us to tell us something she's figured out. 9 of the newspaper clippings were investigations Ethan has worked on. 6 of the cases were crossed out with a black pen. However, there were 2 names that weren't crossed out, and those were the Matchmaker and a different serial killer called the Torturer. Rosa implies that whoever we're chasing is going after other serial killers. This makes his recent victim the Matchmaker. This means his next victim is the serial killer dubbed the Torturer. This obviously doesn't make him a good person since he has framed us for a double homicide of 2 innocent police officers. The only way we can find out more about the Torturer is if we head to the library and meet Rosa there. On our way, we get to witness the absolute carnage that's going on in the city. One interesting thing to note is that on the loading screen, there was a message about a report regarding a disease that affected birds, and now it's affecting humans. It causes a severe brain disorder, and it's the real reason people are going insane and causing all this crime. With this report, it only makes you wonder whether or not it's affected Ethan. We reach the library, and sadly, this is where the game starts to go a bit downhill. Just like the department store section, nothing really happens here until the end. We meet up with Rosa and she gives us the super taser, which makes the game incredibly easy when you use it. So I avoid using it as much as possible. But she also gets kidnapped by the serial killer we've been chasing, so this whole segment essentially turns into a rescue mission. We start seeing incredibly deformed thugs that make you question if Ethan has really gone insane. But then you see normal looking thugs fighting them. We eventually save Rosa and then we have to escort her to a working computer. There's a bunch of time padding events in this level that don't make sense. You have the classic one where you fall down many holes, which then you have to work your way back up. Then there's this one.
How convenient. Okay, jump down and see if you can find your way back to the stairs. I'll go back this way.
So you're telling me Ethan can survive being thrown out of a window, being pushed off a moving train and take a beating from several thugs, but can't make a 1 meter jump? Like, make it make fucking sense. Like, we find a working terminal which allows us to find the Torturer's next victim. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. How would they know he will be killing anytime soon? But we find the information about where he's going to be next, so Ethan can catch 2 killers with 1 taser. But for convenience, oh, I forgot to mention, they've dubbed this man SKX, which is short for Serial Killer X. SKX just sounds like a shitty rapper name you would find on SoundCloud. Anyway, he eavesdrops on us discovering this information and makes a mad dash for the school, which is the next section this game takes place in. Before we enter the school, Van Horn just out of pure coincidence knew exactly where Ethan would be.
Oh, just a coincidence. Saw you from across the street.
God, the plot convenience is insane. Now this section is pretty creepy, since there's these weird looking people that might as well be monsters. But the horror here doesn't hold a candle to the department store. Unfortunately, this is where Condemned starts to become a drag to play. It does eventually get repetitive since the game is nothing else but a melee focused game. There are no puzzles to be solved, no resource management, and also 0 boss fights. Also, the story is filled with convenience and padded sections that draw out the length of the game. Fear was also mostly just combat, but the story in the game combined with the extraction point expansion made it really worth playing. Condemned is a much scarier game though, it just doesn't have that story quite like Fear. The objective of this segment is to find the Torturer, and we quickly discover that he's already reached his next victim, as we find some of his remains. Deeper inside the school, we encounter a fairly unique enemy who has her own weapon. She's called the Butcher, and she has a lot of health, but she shares the same attack patterns as the regular thugs. And at this point, I've pretty much mastered the blocking, so she was a pushover. At least we get her meat cleaver, which is just as quick as the small pipe, but with greater damage. We have to cut through this playground to get to the other side of the school, and this is where we start seeing things that may answer if Ethan is crazy or not.
Thomas speaking.
Thomas, I just wanted to make sure you met me out front when we were done. I didn't want to interfere with the investigation, but...
after this hallucination, we're then attacked by a group. We deal with them and enter the second section of the school, where Ethan has a vision of a man running away from someone. He's lost an arm, so we can use the UV lamp to follow his blood, and this takes us to the biggest scare in this entire game. Now, I'm not an asshole, so I will tell you that, yes, it is a jump scare, but I will explain why it's so great. Rosa says to us that the first picture we took wasn't clear, so we'll have to take another one. In doing so, this happens.
Can you take a close-up?
Help me.
You can see my mouse just freak out again. The reason this jump scare was so incredibly effective is the fact that up until this point in the game, we believed the investigation parts of it were like little breathers we could take because we were never bothered by anything. When we took pictures of the matchmaker's body, Rosa asked us to take a second picture of his face because it wasn't clear, and then nothing happened. They saved this scare towards the end because by then, they knew players would be too comfortable with these tools. The man tells us what happened to him, and then Ethan has another vision, but it's from the perspective of the victim. We see SKX, jeez, that name is so shit. We see SKX attack the torturer and capture him. The hair samples off the door show traces of pesticides that are used on one particular farm. This is where we presume SKX took the torturer. Then Ethan just allows the victim to fall onto the floor and die.
Rosa, send an EMT immediately. Cancel.
On our way out, we walk into a little shitty arena that was pretty difficult. That was until I realised there was a gun at the end. And then before leaving the school, Ethan sees the monster that's been haunting him, and then he passes out. He eventually wakes up and the plot convenience shows up. His name is Malcolm Van Horn. While we were doing all the detective work, this bastard was just outside waiting for us, and is now offering a lift to this farm. This house section though is actually pretty cool. We have to use our UV lamp to piece together a riddle, which we will then have to solve. I just wish the game had more stuff like this, because most of the investigations were just simple button pressing and then story dumping. But this part of the game is then ruined by what is basically just COD zombies but shit. We need a fire axe to clear the stairs in order for us to go up there. But come on, you can climb that, I don't need to say anything. So the game was telling me to look for a fire axe, but whilst I was doing that, the enemies just kept spawning in. I looked everywhere for the axe, only to then discover that there never was an axe inside the house. The last thug spawns in with it. So I basically just had to wait 5 minutes for it to be given to me. Jeez, talk about padding, am I right? We find the torturer and he's already killed himself. The torturer's MO was to put his victim through as much pain as possible to the point where the victim would just take his own life, which is actually horrible. SKX uses the serial killer's own MO to kill them. He killed the matchmaker and posed him with a female mannequin, and then tortured the torturer to the point where he took his own life. This is what SKX does. Ethan then receives a phone call from Rosa, only then for it to be cut off by the FBI, because only now have they just restricted Ethan's lab access. Like, what? Why didn't they think about doing that the moment he went on the run? It makes no sense. SKX returns and then Ethan decides to do something quite stupid. He drags the torturer's body away and then changes into his clothes. His plan is to pretend to be him so that SKX will get close enough to him so he can ambush him. But mate, are you forgetting about the super taser? One shot from that and it's GG. But I guess Monolith had to think of a way to turn this into a balanced boss fight, because Ethan left it with the torturer's body. Yeah, not very clever. But oh wait, SKX dropped this shotgun for us? I guess it's not balanced after all. We beat SKX only to then be knocked out by Van Horn, because we get another pretty shit plot twist. SKX is Van Horn's nephew, and he's been using us to essentially track him down for him so he could try and help him. only to then be knocked out. I mean, that just didn't fucking work, did it, mate? SKX captures us both and explains to Ethan as to why he kept him alive. SKX has been using us to track down the Matchmaker and the Torturer, which is something we already know, so this isn't anything new. SKX then proceeds to cut off Ethan's finger, and it's the first time we've seen Ethan in pain, despite being thrown out of a window and off a train. But during this cutscene, the thing that's been haunting us is watching from above. Van Horn then takes down SKX with complete ease, and then proceeds to say this.
Quickly! You must find and destroy it. It has caused all this madness. Go, kill it, now!
No, please don't tell me this thing is behind everything. Anyway, I'm rushing through this part because honestly, it's fucking lame. These new thugs you fight have so much HP, and you basically have to fight through all of them to reach the end. We enter this building, and whatever this thing is just waiting for us. Before we fight him, no, of course we have to fight his minions. It eventually jumps down, and it has a pretty cool moveset. It's hard to block his attacks, and he's pretty quick. All we have to do is knock him down 3 times and rip pieces off of him. We finally kill it, and we've reached the ending. Ethan runs outside, only to then be stopped by someone. But it's only Van Horn. During the drive, he tells Ethan he cannot return to his old life, because with SKX gone, he can't prove his innocence. But then proceeds to tell us that the cause of everything was an evil entity corrupting people. Seriously? That is so lame. So it wasn't a drug or a disease from the birds that was causing some sort of brain disorder that was causing people to hallucinate and rage. If this was the case, it would have answered as to why Ethan has been hallucinating. But no, just an evil entity. Ethan then suddenly hears something in the back and demands Van Horn to pull over. We then discover that SKX is still alive and Van Horn is trying to save him because he's been corrupted by this power of evil and he was once a good boy and all that bullshit. But at least we have a choice here. We can either kill him or spare him. By killing him, it shows that Ethan is too far gone and all those acts of violence has corrupted him. But if we spare him, it shows us hope and maybe Ethan can prove his innocence and return to the FBI. Oh, what am I kidding? Of course you don't have a choice, because no matter what you decide, he dies in both endings. Either by your hands or his own. And it gets even worse. No matter what you decide, it doesn't even impact the ending, it's still the same cutscene. And in this cutscene, Rosa meets us at the bar. She wanted to tell us that a cult has been behind all this mess. Man, what a cop-out. This story had so much potential of being something a bit more psychological. Maybe if we had choices during the investigations, it could have dictated Ethan's outcome. Maybe he catches SKX, maybe he gets away and Ethan is found guilty. Or maybe SKX was never real to begin with and the disease caused Ethan to turn violent towards the police officers and caused him to have delusions which fabricate the whole story of SKX. Because SKX was someone who had a clean history and has never been on the police system, and out of pure coincidence knew the MOs of all the serial killers perfectly. Now that sounds like the perfect cover-up story to me. But this wouldn't work because SKX abducted Rose in the library, which, you know, confirms his existence. But honestly, after the department store, which in my opinion was the peak of the game, the story went to shit. It's the worst thing about this game. But also, the PC port is incredibly buggy and the combat did get repetitive after a while. The game finally concludes with a shitty jump scare. The whole cult thing is clearly a sequel bait, and there is in fact a second game which I've heard terrible things about, and I kind of find that funny because it just proves Monolith sucks at making sequels. Condemned had a really strong start. The whole investigation concept was intriguing and it made the story feel interesting. I was excited about finding new crime scenes because it would help explain the game more. The combat was challenging yet satisfying, and the overall pacing of the fighting was done brilliantly, and this helped some of those horror moments shine more. The department store was pure genius when it came to producing paranoia, and it's one of the best horror segments I've ever experienced. But as I've said before, the story held this game back and it all went downhill after this point. Now, how do I end this video? 100,000 likes and I'll play Condemned 2.